Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the first session of the scientific conference of these Oncology Days. My name is Johanna Mattsson. I come from the Helsinki University Hospital Comprehensive Cancer Center, and today my co-chair is Professor Mikko Tenhunen, who is also the chief physicist at the Helsinki University Hospital Comprehensive Cancer Center. So radiotherapy is an essential part of comprehensive and multidisciplinary treatment of cancer. During this first session of the scientific conference, special techniques in modern radiotherapy will be introduced. And the first speaker is Professor Heikki Joensuu from the Helsinki University Hospital Comprehensive Cancer Center, and he will now give a talk on the rationale, clinical results, and future development of the boron neutron capture therapy.
Thank you, Johanna, and good morning to everybody. I know that this is the morning that follows the gala dinner, and I know that the title of my talk sounds very complicated. But I can assure you that if you can understand the first slide of this talk, the rest will be much easier. So may I get the first slide now? Oh, the second slide, thank you. Oh. So this is the principle of BCNT, or boron neutron capture therapy. Actually, the principle was presented already about 90 years ago, but it has been quite challenging to make this work in practice. So the principle is such that you have thermal neutrons. That means thermal means low energy neutrons. And when these low energy neutrons hit boron atoms, and it needs to be boron isotope 10, something peculiar happens. The boron will absorb the neutron. It will capture it, and that's where the name of the technique comes from. So after capturing the neutron, the boron becomes unstable, and it will undergo a fission reaction. It will split into two particles. One of them is the helium particle, and the other one is the lithium particle. And these two particles, they are very important potentially for radiation therapy for two reasons. The first reason is that they have just a short path length in tissue, just a few micrometers, and that's less than the radius of a normal cell. Second important thing is that they are heavily ionizing particles, meaning that they cause a lot of damage in the cell, such as nucleic acid breaks. So if there's some means to get boron specifically to the cancer cells, and cancer cells only, the radiation effect, the damaging effect, it will be concentrated on the cancer cells and spare the normal cells. But, of course, it sounds great, but it's been challenging to carry out in practice. But this is the principle. And now the rest of my talk will be much easier. Okay, let's start from the first component. We have three important components here. We have the boron, we have the slow energy neutrons, and then the means to target boron to cancer cells. The boron is the easiest component. It's an element that exists in the Earth crust in small quantities. Most of it is boron 11, 80%. And this is something we can't use for boron capture. We need boron 10, the 20% of boron existing in the Earth crust. It doesn't exist as a pure element on Earth. It's oxidized to other compounds. And this table shows why we use boron, why we need boron. In the atomic world, we talk about the neutron capture cross-sections, and that simply means that what is the ability of an element to capture a neutron? And as you can see from these figures, common elements like oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, etc., they have very small cross-section, and we measure them in units called barns. But boron-10, it has 3,836 barns, so it has a huge cross-section for capturing neutrons in the atomic world, and that's why we need boron-10. We could use a couple of other elements like gadolinium-157. It has an even larger cross-section than boron, or lithium for this kind of capture, neutron capture therapy. But currently we have just a technique to use only boron. So this was boron. Then the next issue in it is the neutrons. Where can we get the neutrons? Neutrons are all over. They are the basic particles of the universe, but they are chargeless and difficult to exploit. In the past, the only way to get neutrons of suitable energy was from nuclear reactors. We were lucky to have a small nuclear reactor in Helsinki called FIR-1. And what we simply did, we made a cavity to the shielding of the nuclear reactor. Uranium was splitting in the reactor and the neutrons were shooting out through that cavity. And then we filled that cavity with a material that slowed down the neutrons. And then the patient was just put next to the hole. Well, that sounds quite, well, at least expensive. It's also quite exciting. And of course, not everybody has a nuclear reactor on their backyard. And this was a severe obstacle for exploiting BCNT, but this has now been solved. And this is the solution. We have now accelerators that can produce neutrons. What we need here is actually a proton accelerator. And then we need a device called proton to neutron converter that converts protons to neutrons, these basic particles of the universe, in a small space. And then we have the patient treatment room. That looks pretty much the other radiation treatment rooms. We just have a neutron port where the neutrons comes out. Then we have a robotic patient positioning and also CT for image-guided radiotherapy so that we can position the patient exactly in the right position in front of this aperture where the neutrons come from. Well, that's nice, but how does the converter work? How can we convert protons to neutrons? And actually that is fairly simple. There are a number of means to do this. The one that we have available is this solution, and it's simply a rotating disk consisting of lithium. And when the protons hit the lithium disk, lithium will become beryllium and release neutrons. So this kind of reaction. So the proton beam will be converted to neutron beam. We need to rotate the lithium disk because otherwise the lithium would melt. It melts at 180 degrees. So we need to rotate it. And secondly, there's a fluidic system inside that disk so that it will cool it down and keep it cool. Actually, the neutron beam that comes out is a very good beam for BCNT. It's even better than we had at the nuclear reactor. So this is how it's done. Then the third problem, how can we get boron into the cancer cells and avoid the normal cells? And here we use also a simple solution. We use an amino acid, phenylalanine. Cancer, when it grows, it produces new cells. The cells build organelles, so they need a lot of proteins and amino acids. So they accumulate amino acids as they accumulate sugar. So we just boronate phenylalanine, and we get boronophenylalanine, or BPA. And this is an atoxic, almost atoxic compound. We can give it grams, several grams to patients, and then it accumulates to cancer tissue. There's another compound called BSH that contains a lot of boron atoms, but it's actually quite expensive, and it is not actively taken into cells. So most people are using BPA. Okay, now we have all the three components all solved. And now we can, still one thing before we start the treating the patient. And this is the nice feature about BPA, because it can be labeled with a positron emitter, fluorine 18. And that's a very nice feature, because then you can image the accumulation of the compound into cancer using positron emission tomography. And in our experience, virtually all cancers, they take up BPA because they grow about 3 to 4 times more than the comparable normal tissue. So you can measure the uptake. And now we start treating the patient with BCNT. So it starts with infusion of BPA over about 2 hours. And in that plastic bag, there's about 30 grams of BPA. It's fairly atoxic. You start the infusion, and then the BPA goes into the blood circulation. The tumor starts to accumulate BPA compared to the normal tissues. And after these 2 hours, you take the patient in front of the neutron beam and start irradiating the patient, which will take about 40 minutes. And this is, one-time treatment. So it's over in 40 minutes, the radiation. So not during 4 or 5 weeks, as with conventional radiation therapy. And now the neutrons, they hit the boron atoms, they split. You get the helium and lithium particles. They cause a lot of damage in cancer cells and hopefully will eradicate the cancer. So this is how you give the treatment. So how about the clinical results? These are the 4 tumor types where BCNT has been mostly tested. The main indication is locally recurrent head and neck cancer. So head and neck cancers that recur locally somewhere in the head and neck area. And first I will talk about this indication. So this is the study that we did in Helsinki using the FIR-1 nuclear reactor. We had 30 patients who had locally recurrent inoperable head and neck cancer who had full dose conventional radiation therapy in history. So these patients didn't have any viable options to treat their cancer. 29 of these 30 patients, they were evaluable for response, and actually the results were pretty nice. Most patients responded, about 70%. And 6 patients had tumor stabilization, but the stabilizations were long, from 5 to 20 months. And this is an example of a oral cavity cancer before BCNT and after BCNT, and there was complete response in this patient to this treatment. Similar studies have been carried out elsewhere. This is a summary slide of those studies. So patients had locally recurrent or locally advanced head and neck cancer. Most patients had full dose prior conventional radiation therapy in history, and they were treated with BCNT only once. And if you look at the response rates, they are fairly similar in all studies, about 70% responses. So fairly good results actually in this kind of patient group with a difficult to treat otherwise. And about 40% of these responses were complete. This is the largest one of these studies. This is a nationwide study carried out in Japan in this patient group. And in this case, BPA was complexed with sorbitol. BPA needs to be complexed with sugar to increase solubility. And so we complex it either with fructose or sorbitol. Complexing with sorbitol gives rise to a compound called boronophalan that is commercially available. These patients didn't have distant metastasis, they just had the recurrence. 93% had received prior conventional radiation therapy, and 79% had prior systemic therapy. The results were pretty much similar as in our smaller study, 70% response rate. And when we look at the survival results, the overall 2-year overall survival was 61% in the group that had squamous cell cancer. That was the biggest subgroup. And actually this 61% 2-year overall survival is very good in this patient group. And moreover, BCNT was well tolerated in this study. The most common acute adverse event was increased serum amylase in the blood. And the amylase probably comes from the salivary glands that were in the radiation field. There were quite few severe or grade 3 adverse events, and also few late adverse events. The most common late severe adverse event was dysphagia, but it occurred only in 2% of the patients. So well tolerated, effective. Second indication, glioblastoma. This is the most malignant brain tumor. The median survival after the diagnosis is just around 1 year with the current treatment that usually consists of surgery followed by radiation therapy plus chemotherapy with an agent called temozolomide. Glioblastoma was the first tumor type selected in the early BCNT studies as the target tumor, and that was because it was easily reachable with neutrons. And this is now the summary of those studies. BPA was again usually selected as the boron carrier compound, and the median survival time achieved with this one-time treatment, one-day treatment, was around 1 year, which is fairly similar to the survival times achieved with the current treatments. But these survival times are no better that we can achieve with the standard therapy. One may speculate that glioblastoma actually is not an optimal target tumor for BCNT because it contains necrotic areas. By definition, it's necrotic. So it also means that there are cells that are hypoxic. They are not metabolically very active and might not be taking up BPA. Then third tumor type, meningioma. This is the most common tumor type of the central nervous system. It arises from the meninges. It is usually a slowly growing tumor, and patients are therefore often just observed, or they have surgery and sometimes radiation therapy as the treatment. But there are some meningiomas that are not this type of benign tumors, but they are highly aggressive. And that's the high-grade or anaplastic meningiomas. And they are just, 2% of all meningiomas. The median survival time of the patients is around 2 years if you get diagnosed with high-grade meningioma. They are difficult to treat, and they may also give rise to metastasis in the central nervous system and also elsewhere in the body. So difficult to treat tumors. This is the largest BCNT series on this type of high-grade meningiomas. 44 patients from Osaka, Japan. All patients were heavily pretreated with median of 3 surgeries. And most had prior radiation therapy, median of 2 treatments. So very heavily pretreated patient population. And the tumors were large, mean volume about 42 milliliters, and most were high-grade anaplastic meningiomas. This waterfall plot shows how the tumor volume shrank after BCNT, and all these columns, they go down. So all tumors, or except one. And these 36 tumors, they were the ones that could be followed up with MRI in this series. So the response rate was 64% and 36% stabilized. So probably all patients got benefit from this treatment. The median progression-free survival was 40 months, which doesn't sound very long, but actually with conventional radiation therapy in this patient group, the median progression survival time is only about 5 months. And interestingly, only 22% of the patients had in-field recurrence within the BNCT fields. The rest of the tumors recurred somewhere else in the central nervous system or had distant metastases. Only 6% had grade 3 toxicity. The investigators were so excited about their results that they have now decided to start a randomized trial comparing BNCT with their standard treatment. Well, the last tumor type that I'm going to talk about is melanoma. Melanoma may be a very good target actually for BNCT because amino acid tyrosine is the starting point of melanoma biosynthesis in human. And if we look at the structures of phenylalanine and boronophenylalanine, they are pretty similar to tyrosine. They're actually analogs of tyrosine. So one could assume that melanoma cells take up BPA particularly well. And actually in preclinical studies they do. So fluorine-labeled BPA accumulates more to melanomas than to non-melanoma tumors. And indeed, in the first larger series, 21 of the 22 patients with melanoma who were treated responded, and 16 completely. This is the Osaka series of skin melanomas treated with BNCT, 8 patients, a small patient group. They had melanoma either on the sole or in the face. And these cases were considered difficult to treat with surgery, or the patients refused surgery. So they were treated with BNCT. And all 8 patients, they responded to single BNCT treatment with PBA. 6 had complete response and 2 had partial response. And during a minimum follow-up time of 5.5 years, only 1 of these lesions progressed. And no severe side effects were recorded, again suggesting that BNCT may be a good treatment for selected patients with melanoma. So these are the potential indications for BPA-based BNCT. Head and neck cancer has actually been approved already in Japan by the local authority for an indication for BNCT, and that concerns the locally recurrent cancer after conventional radiation therapy. Glioblastoma could be an indication, but probably it's best to combine BNCT with other treatments in the treatments of glioblastoma, such as conventional radiation therapy and temozolomide. Promising early results have been reported for high-grade meningioma, then primary and metastatic melanoma, extramammary Paget's disease, and some tumor types are under investigation, such as locally advanced or recurrent breast cancer and some sarcomas. But many tumor types have not been investigated yet with BNCT. Then a few words about the future, which seems possibly bright for BNCT. The first thing to study, at least one of the things, is sequencing of BNCT with other cancer therapies, because tumors are heterogeneous. They may be difficult to cure with one modality only. And BNCT is one-time treatment, so it's fairly easy to combine with conventional radiation therapy, chemotherapy, targeted cancer therapies, or with cancer immune therapy. If you do this, it may be the best to start with BNCT while the cells are still viable and can take up BPA. This is just an example of a patient we treated years back with the FIR1 who had large tumor growing in the nose area, growing into the brain and in both orbits. inoperable, and the radiation oncologist thought that if we treat this patient with conventional radiation, the patient would probably lose vision. So we got permission from the ethics committee to treat this patient starting with BNCT, and then we combined it with conventional radiation that was given and concomitantly with conventional radiation. Cetuximab and cisplatin were given. So there were 4 components in the treatment. And as you can see, there was complete disappearance of the tumor. The patient became long-term survivor and maintained vision. The last topic I'm going to talk about are the new boron delivery agents, the new carriers. And this is perhaps the most exciting thing, in my opinion, about BNCT, because BPA that we use nowadays is not actually an ideal carrier. It has a fairly short retention time in the tumor, and it needs to be compressed with a sugar to increase solubility. But there are a lot of proposals for improvements. Some of them start with BPA. For instance, you can shift the boron from 4 position of the benzene ring to the 3 position. You get 3 PPA, which is about 10 to 100 times more water soluble compared to 4 PPA. Or you can complex PPA with polyvinyl alcohol that results in about 3 times higher intracellular boron retention compared to the standard PPA. And it was more effective in a mouse model. But then there are dozens of suggestions for improvements. Boronated peptides, proteins, polyamines, carbohydrates, etc., liposomal delivery, antibodies, and many of these have just been investigated in the lab, but none of them in the clinic, probably because there's no market, or there has not been any market. But if we will have a market, it is, in my opinion, likely that we will have a better boron carrier in the future, and that would be great, because that would increase efficacy, reduce the side effects. Just one slide about the availability of BNCT. It's limited. Most centers are in Asia and in Japan. But there are plans to have centers in Europe and also in the US. In summary, BNCT is an experimental radiation therapy technique where boron atoms undergo fission in cancer upon neutron radiation. A neutron beam suitable for BNCT can now be produced using accelerators that are compatible with hospital environments. Boron is currently targeted to cancer using a boronated amino acid PPA, but more effective agents are under development. The main indication is locally recurrent head and neck cancer, but promising results have been achieved in some other tumor types. Availability is currently very limited in the EU. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Heikki, for this interesting presentation about the probably strangest form of radiation therapy. We have time for 1 or 2 questions. There's one, please.
That's a very interesting talk indeed. Is there a theoretical limit to the depth where tumors can be to be reached with this technique?
Sorry,
should they be close to the surface, or is there a theoretical limit to how deep lesions can be in the body?
Yes, it is, and that's the reason why glioblastoma was selected as the first target. And the limit is about 8 centimeters, around there. So you can't treat some deep-seated tumors, let's say pancreatic cancer. It's not an easy target, so you need to select these few tumor types. But if we will have a more effective boron carrier agent, sometimes in the future, that would open up the way to treat also deep-seated tumors.
Some representatives from proton centers have been worried and asked if BNCT is going to compete against protons. What do you think about it?
Not at all. Not at all. I don't think proton therapy is precision therapy for certain indication. This is a different type of therapy. So I think that they will be good partners.
Hello, thank you for this very interesting talk. I was wondering, so by what I understood, basically any facility with protons, if they had the rotating lithium disk, they could generate neutrons as well to be able to give this BNCT treatment. It would be a possibility?
So the proton, the neutron disk,
So my question is, if a facility has protons, the thing is that the proton, of course, it has it already its own system. However, would it be possible to eventually add the lithium disk and generate neutrons?
I'm not sure whether I understand the question.
I think you are thinking if the same accelerator can be used for both. Okay, not in general.
Yeah, it's not possible. So you need to buy a different accelerator for BNCT.
The protons from this accelerator is very low, so they are not suitable for treating patients with protons. They are suitable for producing neutrons.
Yeah.
Thank you, Heikki.
Thank you.